All right, hey folks, welcome back to the channel. This is our continuation of our series of the book of Joshua. We are in Joshua chapter 6 right now, but we're just going to be glancing over this a little bit. This is probably the most commonly talked about chapter in Joshua. Everyone who's been in Sunday school, I'm sure, has known about this, and is probably the first thing they think about when they think of Joshua. So I'm just going to turn this straight over to Bash the Shadow. He's got a lot of great insight, and I think you'll find it interesting. So, Bash, take it from here.
Absolutely. So as my friend said, we're not going to cover six specifically in detail. We're just going to sort of springboard off some things that come up in here that a lot of people tend to have trouble with. So, for instance, if we go down to just the manner in which the city of Jericho gets destroyed, if I read out of the ESV here on verse 17, and the city and all that is within it shall be devoted to the Lord for destruction. And all that is within shall be devoted. I skipped the line there. Devoted to the Lord to destruction. Only Rahab the prostitute and all who are with her in her house shall live, because she hid the messengers whom we sent. But you keep yourselves from the things devoted to destruction, lest, when you have devoted them, you take any of the devoted things and make the camp of Israel a thing for destruction and bring trouble upon it. And then they're told to keep the silver and gold and vessels of bronze and iron to go to the treasury of the Lord. So that's what they did. And as many people know, they marched around the city for 6 days, marched around it 7 times the seventh day. They shouted, the walls fell down. And then it picks up in verse 21. They devoted all the city to destruction, both men and women, young and old, oxen, sheep, donkeys, with the edge of the sword. So this specific phrase here, which comes through in some English translations, devoted to destruction, it is actually only used in specific instances when we're dealing with certain tribes in the land. It's very specifically used. It's not some haphazard, just mindless slaughter of people, as it sometimes gets cast. So we're going to have to delve into some interesting history here on where these tribes come from and why the Lord specifically commanded the children of Israel to deal with these tribes in that way, in the specific instances that they encountered them. So let's hit Genesis 6 and Survival Patriot. If you wanted to take that away, Genesis 6, I guess
Yeah,
starting at
yeah, absolutely.
4 or whatever. Yeah.
I just wanted to put in, yeah, like just what Bash said. A lot of people get confused about why God commanded the Israelites to utterly destroy these cities in the Promised Land. And they get a picture of thinking that God, oh well, he's the God of the Old Testament was a mean God. He was a sadistic, evil God who just liked to murder people. And then you get into the New Testament. Oh well, Jesus was loving, but it was kind of a different God or something. No, there's so much more to it, and this is what we're kind of getting into. The reasoning why he told the Israelites to destroy these people. And so it goes all the way back to Genesis chapter 6, where the talks about the how the earth was getting corrupted. And it says, let's start from 6:1. When men began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. Then the Lord said, My spirit shall not abide in men forever, for he is flesh, and his days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. The Lord saw that the wickedness of men was great on the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord regretted that he had made men on earth, and it grieved him to his heart. So the Lord said, I will blot out man, whom I have created from the face of the land, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens, for I am sorry I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. So, whoa, that's huge right there. To have people, it's so wicked that he's like, okay, I'm just gonna scrap this whole thing. It says he was grieved in his heart that he had made man, and oof, wow, yeah, that's just crazy. Banish, why don't you jump in here?
Sure. Yeah. So we have this phrase, the sons of God, and it shows up elsewhere in the Old Testament. It says in Job, when the Lord laid the foundation of the earth and the sons of God shouted for joy. So we're talking about heavenly beings here. You could just colloquially call them angels, but essentially heavenly beings, and they come down and they have children with the daughters of men, and they corrupt the earth. We've already had the fall in Genesis 3 with Adam and Eve, and this is sort of a second, I guess, piece to the destruction of man, when some angels fell and essentially made things that much worse. Other tradition, you get into things like the Book of Enoch, will expand on this whole idea where they start teaching men how to make war and how to teach witchcraft and all this kind of thing. So it just kind of made the whole sin problem that much worse. And it became that much more corrupted. So now God, all along, his whole agenda here is to have mankind in fellowship with him, and he's not going to change that plan. But here's the enemy coming in and putting that kind of at risk by corrupting even the very seed of mankind, to at least some extent. That was a great danger. So it'll say later on in the same chapter in Genesis 6, Noah was perfect in his generations. Some would argue that means his genealogy wasn't corrupted by all this genetic mayhem that was going on, and that's arguable for sure. And there's a third thing that comes up, which is the Tower of Babel. So kind of after the flood, you get this, God's like, okay, so we've started again, Noah and his family. We've got more peoples on the earth again. Things are sort of starting from scratch. And go spread out on the earth and be fruitful, multiply again. But then they all gather together and they want to build the Tower of Babel and essentially, become gods, kind of the old adage that Satan tempted Adam and Eve with in the garden. So God scatters them from the Tower of Babel. So if you can actually pick up in Deuteronomy 32, Moses recounts this, and this is how he describes it in verse 8. It says, when the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, that alludes to the Tower of Babel, he fixed the borders of the peoples according to the number of the sons of God. But the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob his allotted heritage. So we have another group of the sons of God, the ones that sinned in Genesis 6. We find out in other texts, including the New Testament, that they were bound and they were put away in everlasting chains until the judgment of the final day, as it says. I believe that's in Jude. But here we've got more sons of God, and it seems God has appointed them to sort of rule, spiritually rule the nations, and probably in a just way, but God picks out Jacob for Israel to kind of restart this whole mandate of bringing his kingdom to the earth, which is a slow process over time. So he starts with Israel and has a people set apart to himself. And this is also why they had all these ceremonial laws and stuff for that time period, which were created to eventually be grown out of, especially once the Messiah came. But for the time being, they were to keep themselves separate. So if you pick up in Psalm 82, there's an interesting thing about those sons of God that he put over the nations. Psalm 82 says, God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? And it goes on, and he's judging these beings because they've become wicked. They've made men worship them in all the nations of the earth. And he says in verse 6, I said you are gods, sons of the Most High, all of you. Nevertheless, like men you shall die, and fall like any prince. Arise, O God, judge the earth, for you shall inherit the nations.